Arundel. I'm the Goodyear City Manager, and I want to welcome everyone who's able to attend with us this morning, this forum, and I wanted to thank you for your interest in our upcoming special election regarding charter amendments here in the city. Today's session is to provide information only. Staff's role under the law is to educate regarding the fact that we have an election coming up and the items that are up for consideration, but we're prohibited under the law from advocating or asking anyone to take a position regarding voting for or against any of the questions. So again, our purpose in this morning is to help educate so that our community understands the questions before you. So while I wish that this session was in person, we've been working under these COVID conditions for a while. We are trying to make the best of the situation and glad we have the technology to make this work. This session is being recorded for anyone who's not able to be with us this morning, can watch it through our website later. Also ask for your grace. I happen to live right under Luke Air Force Base, and so while I am unmuted, you may occasionally hear the sound of freedom as jets are flying over my home. And hopefully I have no Amazon delivery because the dogs would go crazy. So I want to again just welcome you this morning. We have a lot of information for you. Our presentation's about 20 minutes. And then the remainder of our time together, which is an hour, is for questions and answers, which is really where the good stuff happens. So encourage you to use the chat feature on this application so that you can ask any questions upon the conclusion of the presentation. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our city clerk, Darcy McCracken, and to Jenna Goad, who is the assistant to the city manager, who are going to work us through the presentation, and then I'll be back with you for the questions and answers. Darcy, it's all yours.
All right, well, I want to thank everybody for allowing us to be here to share this information. And the most important thing, of course, is the date of our election, which is March 9th, 2021, which is coming up so very fast. It's unreal how much the time has gone very quickly on this. Also presenting, as our city manager has said, is our Jenna Goad, who is assistant to the city manager, myself. Slide. So moving on to the history and the purpose and recent amendments. So we have
Hey, Darcy, I'm not showing the slide progressed.
I don't think it did. I don't have control over that.
My apologies. That must be on my end. I'll work on it right now.
I'm doing my magic at it. I don't know if
so this is where the grace. This is where the grace comes.
It is technology, and yeah. I'm going to talk I'm going to go ahead and keep talking in the interest of time. The slide itself is not, it just pretty much shows a cover sheet from a city charter from prior to now. So the history of our charter is the Arizona State Constitution does grant specific authority for cities with a population of more than 3,500 to adopt a city charter. The provision recognizes the authority of locally elected decision makers to make local decisions and the ability of the level of government closest to the citizens to respond to specific needs of their communities. 19 cities at this point do have adopted charters. Essentially, we consider them the Constitution, and it sets out the basic governing procedures for the local government. It also includes overarching principles such as the form of government and requirements for public office, but usually does not include such details such as tax rates and administrative processes, as it's not easily changed. Charters are adopted by and amended by the citizens of the community through the election process and then becomes effective upon signature of the governor. The last time that the charter was any kind of large review was in 2004, but it was actually adopted by the voters back in 1988. But it's been amended a number of times. The last actual change that was made was back in 2019 when we had to change the timing of our elections because of some actions by the legislature. slide. So on January 27th, 2020, so that's over a whole year now, the City Council created the Ad Hoc City Charter Review Committee and directed the committee to review the current city charter. The committee was charged with completing a comprehensive review to ensure consistency with language, best practices, and policies. Committee was comprised of 6 Goodyear residents. Renee Guillen was the chair. Jarrett Hickman was our vice chair. Kent Hedges, Kelly Kessler, Shawanda Randolph, and Dave Schaefer were all members. And our 7th member, unfortunately, had to resign due to some work commitments. Now, remember that January 27th, so that was prior to COVID. So right as we were getting ready to dive into the whole charter, COVID hit. And so the process itself took a little bit longer than what we had anticipated because we had to take some time out to try to figure out how we were going to do business differently based on the COVID requirements. So the committee had met now 8 times over 7 months in 2020. They did take the break during the onset of the pandemic. And during the meetings, each city charter article was reviewed. In September of 2020, the committee made a number of major and minor recommendations, and that was to the City Council. Slide. So in October of 2020, City Council made a call for election, referring 10 questions to amend the charter to the ballot. One question is pretty much just some minor administrative grammatical changes, and 9 have more of the substantive changes, which we will now walk through.
Okay, well, good afternoon, and thank you again for attending today's presentation. We really appreciate everyone taking the time out of their busy day to learn a little bit about the election and the changes that are being proposed. So as Darcy said, I'm going to walk through some of the more substantive changes that are being proposed, but a full listing of all of the changes is included in the publicity pamphlet that was mailed to each household with a registered voter and can also be found on the city's website at www.goodyearaz.gov/elections. The first major change being proposed is related to whether or not the city should establish electoral districts. Currently, all of the council members are elected by the entire city, or what's known as being elected at large. Moving to a district system would mean that each council member would be elected from a specific district representing a geographical area of the city based on population. Within Arizona, there are cities that use both systems. And generally speaking, larger cities tend to have district systems and smaller cities tend to be at large. In the city of Phoenix, for example, each of their 8 council districts has a population that's more than twice the city of Goodyear's. Currently, the charter mandates that districts be created when the city's population reaches 150,000 people. Our population is currently just over about 90, maybe 92,000. So that threshold is unlikely to be met for a number of years, if not decades. The Citizens Charter Review Committee that Darcy mentioned had recommended that this provision of the charter be revised to require that a question be sent to the voters once the population hit a certain threshold, but struggled with determining what that threshold should be because it's difficult to predict the future. And as Darcy mentioned, charters by their nature are designed to be inflexible. Rather than mandating that an election be required at a particular point in time, Council requested that the electoral districts be removed altogether so that a future charter review committee could determine in real time if and when a future amendment regarding districts should be presented to voters. This could be considered by a future charter review committee as early as 2030, which would be 10 years since the review that was completed last year, regardless of the city's population at that time. The next proposed change I want to highlight establishes a council compensation committee of residents that would review and recommend compensation changes for the council members. The committee members would be appointed by the council according to the process used for other board and commission appointments. If the recommendation of that citizen committee is an increase or a decrease of 1.5% or less, then the council may vote to enact the change. However, it is important to note that council can only accept or reject the committee's recommendation. They cannot amend it or approve a different amount. And any adjustments that would be approved by the council in that way would become effective on July 1st. If the recommended change is an increase or a decrease of more than 5.1%, it must be approved by the voters through an election. And any adjustments approved in this way would be effective after the election results have been canvassed or certified. Currently, council members cannot approve any adjustments to their own salaries, which means that any adjustments aren't effective until the beginning of their next term. Because our terms are staggered, with half of the members' terms ending every 2 years, this results in some council members having different salaries than other council members for up to 2 years. This proposed change would make any changes to council compensation effective for all council members at the same time. This next provision would establish a process.
Hey, Jenna, you're one ahead on your slide.
I'm sorry, excuse me. This next provision would establish a process for the removal of a council member for unlawful conduct involving moral turpitude, fraud, malfeasance, or corruption. It would require 3 council members to submit charges of unlawful conduct against a fellow council member and an affirmative vote of 5 council members for another member to be removed. Currently, the only method for removing a council member is through a recall election. The next proposed change would establish January 1st as the beginning of the terms for the mayor and the council members. Currently, the charter does not specify a specific date, except that the term shall begin after the vote has been canvassed or certified. It is important to note that this change does not impact the length of the council terms, which are specified in city code, and it also does not impact the term limits, which are specified in sections 5 and 6 of the same article in the charter. The next proposed change addresses what happens if a vacancy occurs in the office of the mayor. Under the proposal, the council would select one of the remaining council members to serve as mayor for the remainder of the term. Council felt that this was appropriate due to our at-large system, which we discussed earlier. Because we don't have districts, all of the council members are elected by the totality of the city, and therefore any council member that was selected to serve as mayor would also have already been elected by voters citywide.
Excuse me, Jenna, there's a question or request in the chat that when we're going through these proposed changes, we indicate which specific proposition number covers the topic.
I see. Thank you for that, Christina. And then also with this one, if the member currently serving as vice mayor were selected to then serve as mayor, a new vice mayor would be selected. And then the final change that I want to highlight relates to the merit system that governs personnel procedures for city employees. Arizona is an at-will employment state, which means that there is no contract between an employee and an employer. An employee can quit at any time, and likewise, an employer can release the employee at any time, so long as it's not for an unlawful reason. In many local governments, a merit system is created, which offers additional protections or job rights beyond what the law provides. The decision on who is covered by the merit system is currently defined in the city charter, and this proposed change would instead make the merit system defined by the city council through ordinance. And then one new addition to the charter that's being proposed is to add a provision that would require the council to consider the appointment of a charter review committee every 10 years. So as Darcy mentioned earlier, the charter hasn't been comprehensively reviewed since 2004. And so this proposed change, as I said, would require the council to consider the appointment of a citizen charter review committee at least every 10 years in order to ensure that there is a periodic, thorough review of the charter. Back to Darcy.
And just so that you can link up to where, and I'm looking at the publicity pamphlet. So all the changes that Jenna went over that were in regarding to the council and compensation, that stuff, that was all under Article 2, which is part of Proposition 451. And then the item about the merit system, that's Article 4, and that is Proposition 453. And Article 13, I had to figure out my Roman numerals. Article 13 is actually Proposition 459.
Also, while we're between slides, there was a question in the chat about who's on the compensation committee and how do they get on there. I posted a link in the chat for all boards and commissions, and the application for a compensation committee, if created, can be found at that link. Currently, there are no members, correct?
Right, because we're in between cycles.
Right.
So as you can see from this slide, this process has taken well over a year to get into a place where then the voters can actually make their determination of whether they want to say yes or no to these changes. We've already done the ballot distribution. So everybody that was a qualified registered voter in the city of Goodyear had a ballot automatically mailed to them. And that's because we did an all mail ballot election. That means there's no polling locations. However, we do have here at City Hall, we will have a ballot replacement site, and that begins on March 1st. And we also have a ballot box here. So once you get your ballot, if you don't want to put it in the mail, you can certainly just drop it off here with us. On March 9th, that is the actual election day, and we will actually have the City Hall open, believing, let's see, 6 a.m. up until 7 p.m. So anytime between those hours, you can drop in your ballot into the ballot box or get a ballot replaced. And next slide. So you can get additional information about the election, and so that you can make informed decisions. We've been sending things out in the In Focus. We've been doing good neighbor alerts. We've been doing other channels on our website. We've got the actual ballot language and the strike through charter language. You've also received, all the households should have received their publicity pamphlet. And I think then the last slide is pretty much, if you go ahead. So at this point, if you have another group that you know that might benefit from this information, just let us know. We'd happy to do the presentation again, but again, we have the recording available. And again, I already gave you the information about City Hall being a ballot replacement site. And at this point in time, we've already received, 13,000 ballots have already been returned at this point. So we are we actually have received more ballots back than we did in the whole election back in 2019. So we look forward to everybody submitting their ballots and letting us know how we did and how they would like to proceed with our charter. And that opens it for questions then.
All right, thank you, Darcy and Jenna. And I wanted to make a few other comments before going back to the chat and answering some questions. Clearly, what we did during this presentation was highlight some of the more significant or substantial changes to the charter. Because this was a comprehensive review of the charter, the committee was focused on language cleanup. They were focused on removing administrative items from the charter, because again, it's meant to be a constitution. It's a very difficult document to change, and instead moving some more administrative functions to the ordinance system controlled by City Council. One example, is the original charter referred to everyone in Goodyear as inhabitants, and the committee felt like that was a very impersonal word, and so that word was struck and replaced with residents. So the committee really looked at how to make the charter more modern, which resulted in a lot of changes, not all of which are significant. So the very first question deals with all of those administrative items. There's also some changes in the charter that removes obsolete language. There was a mention to something in the accounting rules of a sinking fund. Well, that's an old accounting term that does not exist. So the concept was to clean up that language and bring it to more modern vernacular. So unfortunately, that meant that the publicity pamphlet and the ballot language is very lengthy because there are a lot of changes if you look at the red line version of the charter. And again, our focus with this presentation was to highlight the more substantive changes, but certainly encourage you to, based on your level of interest, to review the entire document and submit any questions to this team. So with that, Jenna, I think you were going to kind of moderate any Q&A if there's anywhere we want to start.
Yes, Julie, thank you. There was a question about how the Charter Review Committee is selected. And I know I mentioned also that the Council Compensation Committee would be selected according to the process for all city boards and commissions. But perhaps, Julie, either you or Darcy would like to talk a little bit about how that process does work for all of the different city boards and commissions.
And it's a great question. Joining a board and commission is a fabulous way to become more involved in local government. So Darcy, would you mind reviewing the process for anyone interested in joining any of our multitude of boards and commissions?
On our website, we have the actual application for anybody that's interested in serving on any of our committees, boards, or commissions. And once those applications are received, depending upon if we have an opening, then we will review the application, make sure that we have all the information, and determine that they are a resident of Goodyear, because we have had a couple people that were not residents actually register for our boards and commissions as well. Everybody wants to be a part of Goodyear, but you have to be here. You have to actually live here to be a member of the committee. And then once we have that, then the council subcommittee will review them and they may interview the people. And at that point, they'll make a selection and that goes to the full council for the council to approve the recommendation of the subcommittee. At this point, we actually do have a couple of openings. I've got an opening, I believe, on Parks and Recreation as an alternate. And there's another opening. We have can't think of it's a very long title for a board, commission, or committee. It's really long. It's like talks about appeals, code enforcement, and a lot of that. And we need some very specific, it actually requires an engineer, I believe, to actually be on that so that we have somebody with a lot of expertise in order to make that determination. And I do believe we have another couple openings, plus the Council Compensation Committee was actually even approved by council I believe by ordinance back when they did their last review. And that review needs to take place every 2 years. So that committee is going to be meeting here probably in the next year, because our next candidate election isn't until August of 2022. So we want to make sure that any changes are done prior to then.
And just to clarify, we have some committees which are standing committees, and then we have other committees which are ad hoc committees, which are brought together for a specific purpose. So for example, this Charter Review Committee was an ad hoc committee brought together for this specific purpose. Their work has been concluded and they've been disbanded. And so in 10 years, when another charter committee is brought together, new people would be selected at that point in time. So a number of different opportunities, and encourage anyone interested to go to the website, check it out, ask Darcy any questions, but it's a great way to become more involved in your local government.
Great, thank you. We also received a question. It's related to Proposition 451, which is related to the council. In section 16, it mentions that a vacancy on the council can be filled by a qualified elector. Darcy, can you talk a little bit about what that means to be a qualified elector?
So our charter actually has a couple of requirements, but also state statute has a couple of requirements. In our charter, we have some age requirements for council and also mayor. Statute also, and qualified elector would be somebody that has to be registered voter, and they would need to be a resident of the district that they would be in. When I say district, I mean the city that they would be representing. So again, we couldn't have somebody from Mesa that wanted to come and be a council member in Goodyear. They would have to be a resident of Goodyear. It does require at this point a year, I believe, residency prior to becoming a member of the council. And those, even if they were appointed by the council, then they would still have to have those qualifications.
And then maybe Darcy, you can speak to, this is something that has occurred. We've had vacancies on council. What's the typical process that council has followed to fill a vacancy?
Oh gosh, it's been longer than a day, so bear with me.
Well, I think in general, they do a call for applications.
Yes.
And once, they've received, and I think the last time there were more than a handful of applications, they did interviews. And so council met with each of the applicants, asked questions, and ultimately it is a vote of the majority of the current sitting council that chooses who is selected for that replacement seat, who then has to run for the seat in the next election if they remain interested.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of just high level, high level of how that works.
Okay, we mentioned a few times during the presentation that certain things could be established by council through ordinance. Darcy, can you talk a little bit about the process of how ordinances are adopted and what opportunity the public would have to provide input on ordinances that are being proposed?
Absolutely. So any ordinance that's being proposed by council is actually part of our agenda packet. Our agenda packet is posted no less than 24 hours before the meeting, but our general rule of thumb is that our stuff is all actually published to our website on the Wednesday prior to the Monday council meeting. So, and then we have a new agenda management system that actually allows people to subscribe so that as soon as that agenda is published, then we notify the public. So an automatic email comes out and says that an agenda has been published by the city. And at that point, anybody can look through it, and the ordinances are there. So once they do that, we, again, kind of COVID rules right now. We do have, our meetings are open to the public, so anybody can come and talk about any of the items on the agenda, or even items that are not on the agenda. And for the ordinances, they can, even since it would be on the agenda, they would then fill out a speaker card. They could come and actually speak to council about it. As far as the passage of it after it, all ordinances are published in the local newspaper, and we have established the Southwest Republic as our local newspaper. So the ordinances would actually be there as well.
Thank you. We have a question about Proposition 456, which is related to Article 8, I believe it is, on contracts. In Section 1, at the very end, it removes the words after city clerk, who shall number and register the same, related to contracts. Can you tell us what the intent of that change is?
Currently, this requires that the city clerk actually be the one to number the contract and retain the contract. Well, the city clerk is also the records manager. So the city clerk is already going to manage the contract, but because that's in the charter, it requires us to do a process that doesn't really work for what our process currently is. Because it's in the charter, it's very inflexible. So the suggestion was made that let's pull it together to be more of what makes sense for the way our contracts go. So rather than number our contracts at the end of the process, we would hope to number them then at the beginning of the process, and just make it a cleaner process then all the way around for members of the city, and also for the public, because then anybody that is a member, trying to sign a contract, it's a lot easier to track if there's a number attached to it.
Okay, and similarly on that same proposition, again, 456, in Section 2, it removes the word council. So instead of saying the city council at its discretion may reject any and all bids, it says the city may reject any and all bids. Can you tell us the purpose for that change?
So currently, bids are handled by our procurement office, and that's the best practice, and that's the accepted practice throughout Arizona, is that the contracts are all taken care of before they get to council. And when I say taken care of, I mean that they're opened. The analysis is done to make sure that they meet the minimum qualifications, that they, that's the lowest, most qualified bid. That information is all established prior to it getting to council. Now, a majority of the contracts are still going to go to council based on dollar amount and based on what it's involving. Or it's going to have council's already had given the authority for the city members of the city. I'm sorry, I'm getting all confused here. Members of our staff to be able to move forward with the project based on, they knew that the contract was already going to be done. So this just pretty much makes it so that the city is still going to be advertising bids. The opening is still going to occur, and it's going to be more along the standard practice that we already have. And we do also have on our website, we have the goodyearaz.gov government, well, it's under government and then departments. And then under finance, we have a procurement office, and the procurement office is the one that handles all the bid opportunities.
And if I could interject on a number of these administrative type changes, there are already laws in Arizona state statute that dictate exactly how a public agency may bid and the rules surrounding the bid. So of course, the state law and the laws of the land will always trump our own city charter. So in some of these cases, we removed language because the state statute already requires it, and it was either confusing or duplicative or unnecessary to also have it repeated in our own city charter. And I think procurement is another example of, there's already very specific rules and laws that we have to follow.
And I think Christina's put those links down in our chat as well, right, Christina?
Okay, we also had a question related to Proposition 455, so jumping back one section. In Section 5 of that article, which is Article 7 related to ordinances and resolutions, it strikes out number 5, which says providing for the establishment of fire zones and limits. So this is a list of actions that the council must take by ordinance, and then the proposed change is to strike that out. Can you talk about that and what impact, if any, it would have on the city's fire services?
It actually should have no impact on the fire service. Pretty much what it is doing is actually putting it to the fire marshal, who actually is looking at those plans and can have a better understanding of what is happening with those building plans to establish what the fire zones are and what the limits are. And I believe, there's a lot of thing in the building codes, and building codes are updated, gosh, every other year or so. And the city does adopt the building codes already. So a lot of those fire zones and the requirements for those are within those building codes that the city is and the council themselves are actually already adopting.
Okay, thank you. We also had a question about Proposition 452, which covers Article 3 related to the city manager. And there was a question about the intent or the purpose of removing the language that specifies the term of the contract for the city manager.
Thank you. I'll take that one. So currently the charter requires there be a 2-year contract between the city manager and council. And it was again felt that that was an artificial term that did not need to be delineated in the charter. Rather, the committee felt like that should be something that is accomplished through negotiation through the city manager and city council. And I think I was trying to think of an easy example. Say that my contract is coming up for renewal, but I was lucky enough to be maybe contemplating retirement, and I knew I would be retiring in 18 months. Currently, the charter would only allow for a 24-month contract, which really provides a lot of inflexibility again for that negotiation. So by removing that language, it still requires a contract, which is approved publicly through a vote of city council. It just does not have this restriction of a time period that would be specifically delineated in the charter.
Okay, thank you. Those are all of the questions that I have received so far. If anyone has a question that we haven't already addressed, we'll give you a few more moments to post that into the chat if there's any other questions remaining. And while we're waiting for that, Darcy, perhaps you just want to give a final reminder about the deadlines and the ways that people can return their ballots.
Yes, again, referring to our publicity pamphlet that the households have, these dates are also online. So if you forget, that you can remember the goodyearaz.gov, just /elections. So the last day to request a replacement ballot by phone or online is going to be February 26th. The recommended last day to return a ballot in the mail is Monday, March 1st. If you don't want to go through the mail, you can come in at any time, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. to City Hall here. And we will also have Saturday hours on Saturday, March 6th for anybody that wants to come in to either drop off their ballot or to do the ballot replacement. And the ballot replacement begins on March 1st.
Okay, thank you.
And if I could make just one more reminder, please note that it is a lengthy ballot with 10 questions, and be sure to turn the ballot over. So it is a front and back ballot. If you want to be heard on all 10 questions, please make sure to flip the ballot.
Okay, great. I have not received any additional questions. I believe we've answered everything. I do want to note that a recording of this meeting is going to be posted on the city website, as we mentioned. So everyone is free to refer back to it or to share the video with anyone else who might be interested in this information. Darcy or Julie, do you have anything else to say to close us out?
No, just thank you for your interest and questions that were submitted. We will continue to be available. So if something comes up, once you have a chance to further review it, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. It is very important that our residents understand the questions that you're being asked to provide direction on to the future of our community. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop the recording now.
Okay, thanks everybody.